On April 5th, 2063, exactly 38 years from now, Dr. Zephram Cochrane will test his warp drive, humanity's first faster-than-light engine, and attract the attention of the Vulcans, who will view this as a sign that humanity is ready to make their first steps onto the galactic stage. They will send a scout ship to meet him and propel humanity into a golden age of prosperity and exploration. In celebration of this joyous future occasion, we are going to take a look at the most famous lineage of ships in the galaxy, the Enterprise, starting with the NX-01 and all the sea and space ships bearing that name on the road to it. I'm Joey from Radio Free Vulcan, and this is Every Enterprise, Episode 1. The Long Road. The NX-01 may have been the first Starfleet ship to bear the name Enterprise, and indeed the first Starfleet ship period, but the name wasn't just drawn out of a hat. It was inspired by centuries of naval and spaceflight history, starting with the HMS Enterprise in 1705. This sixth rate was originally a French frigate named L'Entreprise, but was captured by the British in 1705 and its name anglicized to Enterprise. The French actually had 23 other ships by the name of Entreprenant, French for enterprising, between the years of 1671 and 1846, but enterprising isn't the same as enterprise, so those don't count, making the captured HMS Enterprise the first in the Enterprise line. I am unfortunately going to have to gloss over all the other HMS Enterprises, as I think the Starfleet Enterprise was spawned from the American Enterprise line due to the inclusion of the aircraft carriers and space shuttles we will see momentarily. But for completionism's sake, after the 1705 Enterprise, the Royal Navy had a fifth rate in 1709, almost had a frigate in 1741 but changed the name to Liverpool before launch, a sloop captured from Spain in 1743, another fifth-rate renamed to Enterprise in 1771, an Enterprise-class sixth-rate frigate in 1774, a harbor service ship renamed to Enterprise in 1806, a paddle gun vessel in 1824, a survey sloop in 1848 that was used to search for the lost Franklin expedition in the Arctic, almost had a wooden screw sloop in 1861, but it was renamed to the HMS Circassian the next year, and then construction was cancelled the year after that. Then an ironclad sloop that was ordered as the Circassian was renamed to Enterprise in 1862. Why did they do that? Anyway, then there was an Emerald-class light cruiser in 1919, an Echo-class survey ship in 1958, and then a different Echo-class survey ship in 2002. Two completely different classes of survey ship, both named Echo-class. Finally, there were also 4 non-commissioned ships named Enterprise that didn't receive the HMS prefix, namely a paddle steamer in 1839, a tugboat in 1899, an anti-submarine patrol boat in 1914, and another one, the Enterprise II, in 1915. The British apparently liked the name even more than the Americans did, so if I talked about all of these in depth, it would probably double the length of the video. And like I said, thanks to the aircraft carriers, space shuttle, and the specific classes of sailing ship depicted in several of the Enterprise history displays we see throughout Star Trek, it seems like the Starfleet line of Enterprise ships is descended from the American line of Enterprise ships, where we are now. The first American Enterprise was a 70-ton sloop of war in 1775. It was built in St. John's, Quebec under the original name George as a supply ship for the British Navy. It was captured in May of 1775 by Colonel Benedict Arnold and served the Continental Army throughout the Revolutionary War until it ran aground during the siege of Fort Ticonderoga along with 2 other ships, and was burned to prevent it from being recaptured in July 1777. This enterprise wasn't the only enterprise in the Continental Army, though. In 1776, a 25-ton schooner by the name of Enterprise was purchased from privateers by the Continental Navy and used primarily around Chesapeake Bay. It served simultaneously with the first Enterprise until February 1777, when it was apparently returned to the Maryland Council of Safety. Unfortunately, records on the second Enterprise are scarce, and at time of writing are currently missing from the United States Navy's database of American naval fighting ships. I found this to be the case for several of the ships, but this one was the most troublesome due to the lack of other sources on it. The third Enterprise was much more significant. It was built by Henry Spencer at Baltimore in 1799 for the U.S. Navy at a cost of $16,240. It was originally a 135-ton schooner measuring 25.78 meters long by 6.86 meters wide, and was eventually upgraded to a 165-ton brig. She served a long and illustrious career in the quasi-war with France and the First Barbary War, fought pirates such as Jean Lafitte and Charles Gibbs, and sailed patrols throughout the Caribbean and Mediterranean. She eventually ran aground and broke up on a reef in the West Indies in July of 1823. It is likely this version of the Enterprise that is seen on screen at Worf's promotion party in Star Trek Generations. That ship was played by the Lady Washington, a 20th century replica of a 19th century brig just like this one. The Lady Washington also played the HMS Interceptor in Pirates of the Caribbean, and several other pirate ships and other vessels in other movies, TV shows, and even music videos, including Macklemore's Can't Hold Us. The Navy was not without an enterprise for long, as the fourth was launched in December 1831. This one was a 194-ton schooner, measuring 27 meters long by 7.16 wide. She was sent to patrol around South America, Africa, India, the East Indies, Hawaii, and Mexico throughout her career, before being decommissioned in June 1844 and sold in October of that year. 30 years later, the fifth Enterprise, a 615-ton bark-rigged screw sloop, entered service. She was created by John W. Griffiths in Kittery, Maine in June 1874, and then was fitted out at Norfolk, Virginia, and commissioned in March 1877. She measured 56 meters long by 11 meters wide, and could reach a top speed of 20 kilometers per hour, or 11 knots. This was the first Enterprise capable of traveling under her own power, being equipped with a steam engine in addition to her sails. And she was the first to be used for scientific and exploratory duties as far as I can tell. In 1878, she surveyed the Amazon and Madeira rivers before being put on naval duties in Europe and then being decommissioned in 1880. She was recommissioned in 1882 and cruised the East Coast for a year before embarking on a 3-year mission to complete a hydrographic survey all over the globe. She was re-decommissioned in 1886, then recommissioned in 1887, decommissioned again in May 1890, and then recommissioned again in July. Eventually, she was loaned to the Commonwealth of Massachusetts in October 1892 for training purposes, and returned to the U.S. Navy in May of 1909. She was sold in October of the same year, and burned for salvage in 1910. The sixth Enterprise was much less impressive, as it was just a small wooden motorboat built by F.S. Nocte in East Greenwich, Rhode Island in 1917. It was originally owned by Elsie C. Stewart and purchased by the Navy during World War I for $24,101. It was assigned the registry number SP-790 and used as a section patrol craft during the war. Little else is known, but it measured 20.1 meters long by 3.7 meters wide, and could reach a speed of 41 kilometers per hour, 25 miles per hour, or 22 knots. The seventh, and by far most famous enterprise, was the Yorktown-class aircraft carrier USS Enterprise CV-6. She was ordered in 1933, built from 1934 to 1936 in Newport News, Virginia, and commissioned in 1938. As originally built, she had a mass of 19,800 tons unloaded, a length of 246.7 meters, and a width of 33.2 meters. She was later remodeled to be slightly larger. Her top speed was 32.6 knots, 60.2 kilometers per hour, or 37.4 miles per hour. She could carry a maximum of 96 aircraft, though typically only 80 or 90. She fought in World War II and participated in more major actions in the war against Japan than any other U.S. ship. She defended Pearl Harbor during the attack and fought in the battles of Midway, the Eastern Solomons, the Santa Cruz Islands, the Philippine Sea, Leyte Gulf, the Doolittle Raid, the Guadalcanal Campaign, and more. She was the most decorated U.S. ship of World War II and earned 20 battle stars. The Japanese declared her sunk no less than 3 times during the war, all incorrectly, as she was one of only 3 American aircraft carriers to survive the war. After the war, she was decommissioned in 1947. For the next decade, attempts were made to convert her into a museum ship in New York, but these fell through and she was sold and scrapped in 1958. Though her many predecessors played an important role in naval history, it is without a doubt CV-6 that made Enterprise a name history would never forget. After the CV-6 Enterprise was scrapped, her successor, the Enterprise-class USS Enterprise CVN-65, was constructed. Built again in Newport News, Virginia, the 8th Enterprise was built from 1958 to 1960 and commissioned in 1961. She carried many technological advancements over CV-6, including the distinction of being the first nuclear-powered aircraft carrier. CVN-65 served in many significant naval actions throughout the following decades, including the Cuban Missile Crisis and the Vietnam and Iraq Wars. This enterprise displaced 1,088 tons originally and 1,123 after a refit, and measured 332 and later 342 meters long by 78.4 meters wide. Her 8 nuclear reactors turned 4 steam turbines, pushing her to 33.6 knots, 38.7 miles per hour, or 62.2 kilometers per hour. Like the first carrier, this Enterprise could carry up to 90 planes, though this one usually only carried 60. All of this cost the U.S. Navy $451.3 million. In 1986, the Big E was the subject of a temporal incursion by the crew of a much later Enterprise, who had to travel back in time in a Klingon bird of prey to recover a pair of humpback whales, who were extinct in their time. Nyota Uhura and Pavel Chekhov infiltrated the aircraft carrier Enterprise to harvest leaking radiation from its reactors to regenerate the dilithium crystals in their ship's warp drive. In reality, though, these scenes from Star Trek The Voyage Home were actually filmed aboard the USS Ranger, CV-61, because the Enterprise was out at sea during the time of filming. This version of the Enterprise served the U.S. Navy until it was removed from active duty in 2012 and decommissioned in 2017. Due to the radioactive contamination of its reactors and associated components, its disposal will be difficult. Scrapping is set to begin in Mobile, Alabama in 2025 and is expected to take 5 years, though it has been delayed some due to objections from the Mobile Chamber of Commerce. In 1976, the world once again had 2 Enterprises in service at the same time, albeit only briefly. In this year, 2 years of construction on the Space Shuttle Enterprise OV-101 was completed. In August through October of 1977, it made several test flights to pave the way for NASA's Space Shuttle program. Enterprise's specifications differed from the other orbiters, but the average shuttle weighed 120 tons and measured 37.23 meters long, 23.79 meters wide, and 17.86 meters tall. In real-life history, it was originally named the Constitution, but renamed to the Enterprise by President Gerald Ford after a letter-writing campaign by Star Trek fans convinced him to change the name. In this timeline, the Enterprise was a partially functional prototype built primarily to conduct approach and landing tests. It would have eventually been retrofitted into a fully operational space vehicle, but too many significant design changes had been made between the construction of Enterprise and OV-102 Columbia, and the retrofit process for Enterprise was deemed too costly. Instead, OV-099 Challenger was built from a test frame. Later on, after the tragic loss of Challenger, Enterprise was once again considered for a refit to replace it, but once again it was deemed more cost-effective to build a new shuttle, this time OV-105 Endeavour. So, Enterprise stayed in storage until 2003, when it was restored and placed on display at the Smithsonian's Stephen F. Udvar-Hazy Center in Virginia until 2012, when it was moved to the Intrepid Museum in New York City. However, in the Star Trek timeline, it appears that the Enterprise was retrofitted and added to the functional orbiter fleet, where it served until the surviving shuttles were retired in 2011. The first Enterprise we are yet to encounter will be the Gerald R. Ford-class aircraft carrier, USS Enterprise CVN-80. Construction began on the 9th Naval Enterprise and 10th Enterprise in general in April 2022, and is expected to be complete in 2025, delivered in 2028, and commissioned in 2029. It will incorporate about 35,000 tons of steel from CVN-65 and 4 portholes from CV-6. It will weigh 100,000 tons and measure 337 meters long by 41 meters wide. At some point between humanity's first warp flight by Zephram Cochrane in 2063 and the NX project's Warp 2 flight in 2143, there was one more Enterprise, the XCV-330. We know essentially nothing about this ship, other than that it existed and was named Enterprise. It was honored in historical displays on several ships and other locations, and was seemingly one of humanity's first proper warp starships. In fact, in older sources, it was considered to be the first warp ship, but those are not compatible with the events of the film First Contact and the series Enterprise, and must be disregarded. More recent sources state that the class was used until the 2120s, when it was retired in favor of ships compatible with Henry Archer's much faster Warp 5 engine. Its last flight was in 2129, though a replica was flown on the 150th anniversary of that flight in 2379. After the retirement of XCV-330, there would not be another Enterprise in service for 22 years, but it would be well worth the wait. This, of course, was the NX-01. Design. The NX-01 was an evolution of the basic form human starships had used for decades. It featured a large, saucer-shaped hull with 2 sponsons to the rear, tipped with the ship's impulse engines for sublight travel. Between these was its symmetrical warp field governor, a device which kept the ship traveling in a straight line at warp and protected it from warp bubble collapses or catastrophic structural failure in the event of an unbalanced warp field. 2 pylons angled up and back held the ship's warp nacelles, which followed the customary human starship design developed by Zephram Cochrane for his Phoenix test vehicle in the 2060s and used until the 2270s. They were tipped with Bussard collectors to harvest interstellar particles like hydrogen and deuterium for fuel replenishment to extend the starship's range. The sides of the nacelles were lined with glowing intercooler assemblies, and had a space matrix restoration coil at the rear. Inside the nacelles were the ship's warp coils, which propelled it faster than light by warping space around it, as well as a service catwalk. The main hull of the NX-class had 7 decks, labeled A through G. The bridge was on A deck, main engineering and most crew quarters were on D deck, sick bay, senior officer quarters, and the shuttlecraft launch bay were on E deck, and the torpedo bay was on F deck. And of course, there were many other laboratories, crew facilities, and more in between. There were decontamination chambers near the shuttle bay, and the ship was also equipped with the first transporter, rated for transporting living organisms, to be installed on a human starship. There were 2 cargo bay doors each on the top and bottom of the saucer, as well as numerous weapon, equipment, and sensor ports. Several sensor pallets adorned the rim of the saucer as well, and the ship's main sensors were located in a dome at the bottom of the saucer. Also on the bottom of the saucer, at the rear, were an observation gallery, the 4 Shuttlepod drop bays, and a launch bay observation room. The bottom of the saucer also held hatches for the ship's grappler, which could fire a pair of tow cables. The sides of the saucer had large, dark-colored pads for docking clamps to latch to, which also held its port and starboard navigation lights. Finally, at the front of the saucer was the deflector dish, which projected a field in front of the ship to brush aside particles and small objects at warp that would destroy the ship if it struck them at superluminal speeds. The NX-01's name and registry number were prominently painted on the hull just behind that. In-universe, the NX-01 was designed by a team of human engineers supervised by Commodore Maxwell Forrest. Its Warp 5 engine, the fastest warp drive created by humans at the time, was designed by Henry Archer and Zephram Cochrane. Behind the scenes, it was created by production designer Herman Zimmerman and VFX artist Doug Drexler. Specifications. In addition to being the fastest human starship ever built at the time, the NX-01 Enterprise was also the largest, at 225 meters long by 136 meters wide and 33 meters tall. It had a cruising speed of warp 4.5 and a maximum speed of warp 5.06. This calculates to a range of about 91 to 130 times the speed of light. It had a crew of 82, led by a commanding officer, first officer and science officer, chief engineer, tactical and armory officer, helmsman, communications officer, and chief medical officer. The NX-class was relatively well armed for its time, with 4 forward and 2 rear torpedo launchers, and 3 phase cannons. Its launchers were originally armed with spatial torpedoes, but these were later replaced with the much more powerful photonic torpedoes, which offered an extremely variable yield, allowing them to deal highly precise and limited damage, or destroy entire ships in a single hit. It was also equipped to launch various types of probes and subspace relays. The NX-class carried 3 embarked craft. 2 of these were an unnamed class of Shuttlepod used in many Starfleet facilities at the time. These would connect to a docking arm on the underside of the NX and be raised into or lowered out of the launch bay for recovery and deployment. The NX class had 4 such bays, but at least the Enterprise, and likely the other ships of the class, only carried 2 Shuttlepods at a time. These shuttles had 1 pilot and could carry 6 passengers. They measured 6.7 meters long by 5.3 meters wide and 2 meters tall. They were armed with 2 plasma cannons and could be retrofitted to carry small spatial charges as well. The NX class also carried at least 1 inspection pod to survey the exterior of the craft. This was a tiny conical pod with seats for 2 crew. It measured about 3.3 meters long with a diameter of around 2 meters, and was stored in and launched from the cargo bay instead of the shuttle bays. History. The NX project began sometime prior to the year 2143 at Starfleet headquarters in San Francisco. This was the most ambitious human engineering project since the development of the warp drive about 80 years earlier, and aimed to create a Warp 5 engine and a ship to utilize it when the fastest human starships of the time could only reach Warp 2. It was overseen by Commodore Maxwell Forrest, led by Zephram Cochrane and Henry Archer, and supervised by delegates from the Vulcan High Council. It pains me to gloss over the development of the NX project, but I'll be brief and perhaps return to it in a future video. Their first test ship, the NX Alpha, was destroyed after exceeding Warp 2, stalling the project when the Vulcan Advisory Council instructed the Earth government to shelve it. Undeterred, the late Henry Archer's son Jonathan and colleague A.G. Robinson modified the second test vehicle, NX Beta, to correct the catastrophic failure of the NX Alpha and prove that the project had merit after all. The third vehicle, NX Delta, became the first human spacecraft to reach Warp 3, and the program developed the Freedom-class starship shortly after, of which the USS Franklin became the first ship to reach Warp 4. Then finally, in 2149, the keel was laid for the NX-01, and in April 2151, the Enterprise was complete. Jonathan Archer was selected for command, much to the chagrin of the Vulcans. In exchange for the use of Vulcan star charts, though, they required a Vulcan officer named T'Pol to be placed as second in command of the Enterprise. Archer and T'Pol served as the Enterprise's commanding officer and first officer, Charles Tucker III as chief engineer, Malcolm Reed as tactical officer, Travis Mayweather as helmsman, Hoshi Sato as communications officer, and Dr. Phlox as chief medical officer. The launch of the Enterprise was moved forward to 3 weeks ahead of schedule to return an injured Klingon to his homeworld after he was attacked on Earth by a Suliban assassin. Various systems, such as the torpedo launchers, were not yet fully tested, and some, like the phase cannons, weren't even installed. Nevertheless, the Enterprise began her exploratory duties immediately after the return of Klang to Kronos. They met various new civilizations, both friendly and hostile, and made numerous scientific discoveries. In March of 2152, the NX-01's mission was briefly cancelled after one of its shuttlepods appeared to ignite an explosive gas in the atmosphere of the planet Paragon II, killing 3,600 colonists, leaving Vulcan Ambassador Soval to instruct Earth to wait another 10 to 20 years before attempting another deep space exploration mission. However, Captain Archer was able to discover that the accident had been caused by Suliban saboteurs, and the mission was reinstated. By September of 2152, the Enterprise had traveled over 100 light-years away from Earth. After an attack on Earth by the Xindi in March 2153, the Enterprise was recalled home again and arrived about a month later in April. It was outfitted with new photonic torpedoes, stronger hull plating, new software for its universal translator, and a new command center. It also departed Earth with a new mission, to search the Delphic expanse for the Xindi weapon. This proved to be a long and difficult process, but the weapon was found in February 2154. After 10 months in the Delphic expanse, the surviving Enterprise crew returned to Earth as heroes. Not long after, the Enterprise was sent to investigate a bombing on Vulcan, and after that resumed their original mission of exploration. In January 2155, the Enterprise was present for the founding of an alliance between Earth, Vulcan, Andoria, Tellar, and Corridon, which would become the United Federation of Planets. Later that year, the Enterprise underwent a refit to upgrade it to a Columbia-class starship, adding a secondary hull with a new deflector dish, and was recommissioned as the USS Enterprise. She then went on to fight in numerous battles in the Earth-Romulan War, before being decommissioned in 2161 and placed in the Starfleet Museum in orbit of Athon Prime. Newer Columbia-class starships remained in service in a limited capacity for over a century, receiving a major upgrade in the early 23rd century and a complete overhaul in the 2080s to bring it in line with the technology and aesthetics of other ships of that time period. The long-retired Enterprise was of course not one of the ships to receive that update. There was another Enterprise in service by then, but that's a ship for a future video. And so that is the NX-01 and every Enterprise leading up to it. Let me know which one was your favorite, besides the NX-01, and what you'd like to see next. There were a lot more pre-warp Enterprises than I thought there were. I know about the aircraft carriers and 2 of the sailing ships, but I had no idea there were that many of them. And also let me know if you're excited to meet the Vulcans in 40 years. I sure am. As you can perhaps tell by the lengthy runtime, this video was quite a lot of work, so I would be thrilled if you could support it by subscribing to the channel, liking and sharing this video, and watching another one. If you are a new viewer, I release a new video every single Saturday. Typically, these are a Star Wars ship breakdown or list, but I have many Star Trek videos planned for the next few months if this one does well. Take a look at my other videos, and if you like what you see, stick around. Tentatively, I plan to release an installment of every Enterprise every 3rd week or so, more often if it's quite popular, less often if it isn't. Next will be Pike's Enterprise from Strange New Worlds and the original series Enterprise, or perhaps 2 separate videos for them, then the Refit Enterprise and Enterprise A, the Enterprise B and C, then one each for the D, E, F, G, and beyond. I am very excited to share this series with you, so I hope you'll stick around. Finally, thank you so much for watching, have a great first contact day, and live long and prosper. RFC, out.